My name is Linda, and I am 64 years old. As a retired ballet instructor, I dedicated my career to discipline, grace, and the pursuit of perfection. For 40 years, I poured my heart into teaching young dancers the beauty of movement and the importance of dedication. I tirelessly worked to build my studio and my reputation while raising my daughter Emily as a single mother, applying the same high standards to her upbringing that I demanded of myself and my students. I believed with every fiber of my being that these standards were for her own good, that pushing her toward excellence would give her the tools she needed to succeed in life. I sacrificed personal luxuries, romantic relationships, and my own comfort, always prioritizing Emily's well-being and future, though I now understand that in my dedication to perfection, I may have inadvertently pushed away the person I loved most in this world. Then, like a cruel choreographer arranging the most tragic dance of my life, a severe heart diagnosis confronted me with my own mortality. But even more devastating than the prospect of death was the crushing weight of profound regret that settled over me like a heavy curtain. My past strictness, my relentless pursuit of excellence, my inability to express love in ways that Emily could understand had pushed her away from me completely. She now lived 3 states away, offering only terse, cold communication when absolutely necessary. During our last painful conversation, her words cut through me like broken glass. "You always pushed me too hard, Mom. You never really saw me as a person, just as a project to perfect. I still carry that pain every single day. You had no humanity for my feelings, only your expectations. My love, everything I had ever tried to give her, had been completely misconstrued. My spirit felt shattered beyond repair. My future, whatever time I had left, seemed destined to slip away without the connection to Emily that I craved more than my next breath. Yet as despair threatened to consume me entirely, something deep within my ballet instructor's soul began to stir. 4 decades of teaching had given me an unwavering dedication to discipline, but also to emotional expression and the power of authentic movement to convey truth. What Emily, her husband Daniel, and my other children Mark and Lisa didn't know was my most precious secret, meticulously detailed teaching logs that chronicled not just my students' progress, but my own internal struggles to balance strictness with affection. Personal journals filled with my constant questioning of whether I was being too demanding, too focused on perfection. And most importantly, cherished performance photos from Emily's childhood filled with tender handwritten notes expressing my overwhelming pride and love for her. My psychotherapist ally was waiting to help me find the courage to share these truths. This time, my past wouldn't just haunt me with regret. It would reveal my true emotional landscape, reclaim the connection I had lost, and offer both Emily and me a chance at genuine healing, no matter how agonizing the cost of confronting our shared pain might be. The morning after my cardiac surgeon delivered the news that my heart condition was more serious than we had initially hoped, I found myself staring at the phone in my hospital room for nearly an hour before summoning the courage to dial Emily's number. The bypass surgery had been successful, but the doctor's gentle warning about lifestyle changes and the importance of reducing stress and strengthening family connections echoed in my mind like a desperate plea from my own heart. When Emily finally answered on the 4th ring, her voice carried that familiar coolness that had become our normal mode of communication over the past several years. "Hello, Mom," she said, and I could practically hear her checking the time, calculating how quickly she could end this conversation and return to her busy life. "Emily, sweetheart, I began, my voice still weak from the anesthesia, but filled with a vulnerability I hadn't allowed myself to show in years. I wanted you to know that the surgery went well and I'm recovering. But more than that, I've been thinking about us, about our relationship, and I realized that I may have made some mistakes in how I raised you. I'd love to have a real conversation about it, maybe even see you if you could find the time. The silence that followed stretched so long that I began to worry the call had been disconnected. When Emily finally spoke, her words were measured and distant, as if she were reading from a script she had rehearsed many times. Mom, I'm glad you're okay, I really am. But I'm incredibly busy right now with the kids' school activities and Daniel's work situation. I just don't have the emotional energy to dive into the past right now. Besides, we've been over this before. Her words hit me like a physical blow, but I pressed on, hoping to reach some part of the warm, loving child I remembered. Emily, I know I was demanding when you were growing up. I know I pushed you hard with ballet and academics, but it came from a place of love, from wanting you to have every opportunity to succeed in life. If I hurt you, if my expectations were too much, I need you to know how deeply sorry I am. But instead of the understanding or even anger that I might have been able to work with, Emily's response was cold and final. You always pushed me too hard, Mom. Your expectations were impossible to meet. You never really saw me as a person, just as a reflection of your own ambitions. I still carry that pain with me every day. You had no humanity for my feelings, only for your vision of who you thought I should become. The word humanity struck me like a slap. To be accused of lacking humanity by my own daughter, the child I had sacrificed everything for, was devastating beyond anything I could have imagined. I don't want to visit the hospital, and I don't want to rehash all of this again, Emily continued. I've worked hard to build a life where I feel safe and valued for who I am not, who someone else thinks I should be. I need you to respect that. After Emily hung up, I immediately called Mark, my middle child, hoping that he might be able to help me understand how to bridge the chasm that had opened between Emily and me. Mark had always been more easygoing, more forgiving of what he called my perfectionist tendencies. Mark, I said when he answered, I just talked to Emily, and I'm afraid I've really damaged our relationship. She says I pushed her too hard when she was young, that I didn't see her as a person. I don't know how to fix this, but I need to try. Mark's response, while more gentle than Emily's, was equally dismissive of my concerns. Mom, honestly, you're overthinking this. You were just a tough parent. Emily's always been too sensitive about everything. She needs to get over it and realize that you did the best you could as a single mother. His casual dismissal of Emily's pain stung almost as much as her rejection had. But Mark, if she's still carrying hurt from her childhood, doesn't that mean I need to address it? Shouldn't I at least try to understand what she went through? Mom, stop beating yourself up over this, Mark said with a sigh that suggested he found this entire conversation tedious. Emily's a grown woman with her own family now. She can't blame her childhood forever. You raised her to be strong and successful, and she is both of those things. That should be enough. But Mark's reassurances felt hollow when I learned through Lisa what Daniel, Emily's husband, had been saying about me to other family members. During a barbecue at Mark's house that I hadn't been invited to, Daniel had made comments that eventually found their way back to me through a chain of family gossip. Emily won't visit her mother in the hospital. Daniel had apparently told Mark within earshot of several other relatives. She still feels the scars from growing up in that house. You don't know what it was like being raised by someone who cared more about perfect posture and flawless performances than about whether her own daughter felt loved and accepted. Linda has no humanity for real feelings, only for achieving some impossible standard of perfection. The word humanity, again this time, from my son-in-law, a man who had never lived in our house or witnessed the countless ways I had tried to show Emily my love. The accusation felt like a knife twisting in my chest, suggesting that I was somehow fundamentally lacking in basic human compassion. When I tried to reach out to Emily again a few days later, hoping to address some of the concerns that had been raised, I found myself faced with what she and Daniel called boundaries. Emily would only accept text messages and only about practical matters. Phone calls were discouraged. Visits were out of the question until I could acknowledge the harm I had caused and commit to respecting her healing process. Lisa, my youngest child, tried to be supportive, but ultimately reinforced the message that I needed to accept Emily's terms. Mom, I think Emily just needs space right now. Maybe if you give her some time and show that you respect her feelings, she'll come around eventually. But Emily's idea of space seemed to involve an ever-increasing set of restrictions on our communication. Text messages that had once been brief but civil became even shorter and more infrequent. When I asked about my grandchildren whom I hadn't seen in over 8 months, Emily's responses became curt to the point of rudeness. The kids are fine. They're busy with school. The most painful restriction was Emily's request that I not contact her children directly. They don't need to be caught in the middle of our issues, she explained in a text message that felt like a formal notification rather than communication between family members. Mark, rather than helping me navigate this increasingly hostile situation, began reinforcing Emily's boundaries as reasonable and necessary. Mom, you need to accept that Emily has the right to protect herself and her family from situations that cause her stress. If she says she needs space, you should give it to her. The irony was devastating. I had spent Emily's childhood trying to prepare her for a world that would demand excellence and resilience, and now that same strength was being used to shut me out of her life completely. The love that had motivated every strict lesson, every high expectation, every moment of discipline had been reinterpreted as evidence of my fundamental lack of humanity. As I lay in my hospital bed during those long nights of recovery, I began to understand that I was facing something far more complex than a simple misunderstanding between mother and daughter. This was a complete rewriting of our family history, a narrative that cast me as the villain in Emily's story, rather than the imperfect but devoted mother I had always tried to be. The choice before me was stark accept Emily's version of our past and the limited relationship she was willing to offer, or find some way to show her the truth about my love and the real reasons behind the choices I had made. But I was beginning to realize that the truth I wanted to share was far more complicated and painful than even I had fully understood. The weeks following my surgery were filled with a kind of isolation I had never experienced before. Emily and Daniel's campaign of emotional distancing escalated from simple avoidance to what felt like a systematic erasure of our shared history. Every attempt I made to connect was met with increasingly shorter, more hurried responses that made it clear I was now viewed as an unwelcome intrusion in their carefully constructed life. The phone calls that had once been brief but civil became non-existent. Text messages became the only acceptable form of communication, and even those were limited to what Emily called essential information only. When I tried to ask about my grandchildren's activities or school performance, the responses were so generic they could have been copied from a form letter the kids are doing well in school. They're very busy with activities. But it was Daniel's subtle manipulation that truly revealed the depth of their coordinated effort to push me out of their lives. During one of our increasingly rare phone conversations, he made a suggestion that left me speechless with its calculated cruelty. "Linda," he said in a tone that managed to sound both concerned and condescending, "Emily and I have been talking, and we think it might be beneficial for everyone if you consider downsizing your living situation. That big house with all those family photos and dance memorabilia might be too emotionally charged for Emily right now. Maybe a smaller apartment, something more neutral, would make it easier for her to visit when she's ready." The audacity of suggesting that I should eliminate the physical evidence of our family's history, that I should erase the very spaces where Emily had grown up and learned to dance, was breathtaking. But what hurt most was the implication that our shared memories had become so toxic that they needed to be physically removed from my living space. It was during this dark period that I made a discovery that shattered whatever remaining hope I had harbored for reconciliation. Through a mutual friend, I learned that Emily had systematically removed all photographs of me from her home. Not just recent pictures, but childhood photos, family vacation memories, even pictures from her wedding, where we had danced together, and she had whispered that she was grateful for all the lessons I had taught her. When I asked Lisa about this, hoping there had been some misunderstanding, her confirmation was gentle but devastating. Mom Emily told me she needed to purge negativity from her living space as part of her healing process. She said, looking at pictures of you reminded her of all the pressure and criticism she felt growing up. The phrase purge negativity hit me like a physical blow. My daughter had literally erased me from her visual environment, turning our entire shared history into something toxic that needed to be eliminated for her emotional well-being. I had become not just an unwelcome presence in her current life, but a contaminating force that threatened her mental health. It was during this devastating realization that a memory I had buried for over 20 years began to surface, triggered by the stress and the constant feeling that everything I thought I knew about my relationship with Emily was being turned upside down. The memory involved a secret I had kept to protect Emily's future, a sacrifice so profound that even now, thinking about it, made my hands shake with a mixture of grief and anger. Emily had been 16 when it happened, a promising young dancer who had been accepted into a prestigious summer ballet program that could have opened doors to professional opportunities. She had been working so hard, pushing herself to meet the demanding schedule of classes, rehearsals, and competitions that I had thought was necessary for her artistic development. I had noticed subtle changes in her movement, small signs of favoring one leg over the other, moments when she winced during what should have been effortless extensions. But Emily had assured me she was fine, that she was just tired from the intensive training schedule. It was only through my careful observation and some discreet inquiries with her instructors that I discovered the truth. Emily had suffered a severe stress fracture in her left ankle, an injury that she had been hiding for weeks because she was terrified of disappointing me and jeopardizing her acceptance into the summer program. The fracture was so severe that it required immediate surgery and months of rehabilitation. Without proper treatment, she could have faced permanent damage that would have affected her ability to walk normally, let alone dance. But the experimental surgery and rehabilitation program were not covered by our insurance, and the cost was staggering, $75,000 that I simply did not have. I spent 3 sleepless nights researching treatment options, calling specialists, and trying to find a way to get Emily the care she needed without destroying our financial security. In the end, I liquidated my entire retirement savings, took out a second mortgage on our house, and even sold some of my mother's jewelry to cover the costs. But perhaps more importantly, I made a decision that I now realized had shaped our entire relationship going forward. I never told Emily the full extent of her injury or the financial sacrifice I had made to treat it. Instead, I created a careful narrative about a minor setback that would heal completely with proper rest and physical therapy. I had done this to protect her from feeling guilty about the cost, to prevent her from blaming herself for the end of her ballet dreams, and to preserve her emotional well-being during what was already a devastating time for a teenager who had built her entire identity around dance. The cosmic irony was unbearable. Emily's current accusations that I had pushed her too hard, that I had cared more about her performance than her feelings were, based on her complete ignorance of the lengths I had gone to protect her from the consequences of that very pressure. When I tried to subtly reference this period during one of our increasingly hostile conversations, hoping to help her understand the context of some of my past decisions, Emily's response was swift and brutal. "Mom, you're always trying to make me feel guilty with your so-called sacrifices." She snapped, her voice filled with the kind of contempt I had never heard from her before. "Your past choices are your own business. Daniel says you're trying to manipulate me with guilt and sentimentality, and I think he's right." Mark, who had apparently been influenced by Daniel's interpretation of my motives, reinforced this dismissive attitude. "Mom, Emily's feelings about her childhood are valid, regardless of what you think you were doing at the time. You need to accept that you caused this pain and stop trying to control the narrative." The phrase, "control the narrative," stung almost as much as Emily's accusations of manipulation. I wasn't trying to control anything. I was desperately trying to help her understand the truth about my motivations and the love that had driven every difficult decision I had ever made. But the most devastating blow came when I learned that this rewriting of our family history was being reinforced by people outside our immediate family. Brenda, Daniel's sister, had begun posting on social media about the importance of breaking cycles of toxic parenting and choosing healing over family obligation. One post in particular felt like it was aimed directly at our situation. Some people just can't accept responsibility for the harm they've caused. It's sad when families have to make tough decisions for their own healing, but sometimes protecting yourself means setting boundaries with people who refuse to acknowledge their behavior. The formal proposal that arrived from a lawyer Daniel had hired was the final insult in this campaign to redefine our relationship entirely. The document outlined a series of conditions that would need to be met before Emily would consider any form of reconciliation. I would need to sign a binding agreement permanently relinquishing all attempts at unsupervised reconciliation and formally acknowledging past emotional harm caused by overly strict and demanding parenting practices. In return, Emily and Daniel would graciously agree to allow infrequent supervised correspondence with my grandchildren and cease making public comments about our family situation. The proposal was stunning in its audacity. Emily was asking me to legally admit that my love had been a form of abuse, that my efforts to prepare her for success had been harmful, and that any relationship we might have in the future would be contingent on my acceptance of this distorted version of our past. Reading that document, I realized that I was facing something far more sinister than a simple misunderstanding between mother and daughter. This was a systematic attempt to gaslight me into believing that my love had been harmful, my sacrifices had been manipulative, and my memories of our relationship were fundamentally false. The choice before me was stark and terrible: accept Emily's version of our past and the humiliating conditions she was demanding, or fight for the truth about our relationship, knowing that the battle might cost me any chance of seeing my grandchildren again. Some principles are worth more than peace, and some truths are too important to remain buried. My daughter deserved to know the real story of my love for her, even if she chose to reject it. The legal document that would formalize my banishment from my own daughter's life arrived on a cold February morning, delivered by certified mail, with all the bureaucratic efficiency designed to make me feel like a criminal rather than a heartbroken mother. The attorney's letterhead was imposing and formal, and the language was clinical and devastating. Dear Mrs. Linda Harrison, it began using my formal name as if I were a stranger rather than the woman who had given birth to Emily and devoted her entire life to her well-being. After extensive consultation with our clients, we are formally notifying you that a temporary restraining order has been issued against you, effective immediately. The legal language that followed was designed to be as humiliating as possible. Daniel and Emily had filed a petition claiming that I was engaging in emotional harassment and obsessive behavior related to what they characterized as Emily's childhood trauma. They alleged that my increasingly desperate attempts to force reconciliation were causing Emily severe emotional distress, and that legal intervention was necessary to protect her from my manipulative tactics. Most devastating of all, the restraining order didn't just prohibit me from contacting Emily and Daniel. It included my grandchildren Emma and Jake, whom I hadn't seen in over a year, but whom I loved with every fiber of my being. Any violation would result in immediate arrest and prosecution. The letter concluded with a paragraph that was clearly meant to destroy any remaining hope. Our clients have made this difficult decision solely to protect their family from ongoing emotional abuse and manipulation. I read those words over and over, each repetition driving the knife deeper into my heart. My own daughter had characterized my love for her as emotional abuse, my desire for reconciliation as manipulation that required legal intervention to stop. But I wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. The ballet instructor in me understood that sometimes the most powerful expression of truth comes not through words, but through the careful preservation of authentic moments that capture the essence of relationships and reveal the love that others might want to erase. I spent hours creating a small, intimate album that told the story of Emily's childhood through the lens of our shared love for dance. Pictures of her first recital at age 5, her face glowing with pride as she curtsied for the audience. Photos of us practicing together in our living room, both of us laughing as she tried to master a particularly difficult combination. Images of her high school graduation, where she had thanked me publicly for teaching her discipline, grace, and the courage to pursue excellence. Each photograph was accompanied by handwritten notes I had made at the time, expressions of my overwhelming pride and love that I had never shared with anyone. Emily's first solo today, my heart nearly burst with pride watching her discover her own artistry. She worked so hard on this piece, and seeing her joy when she finally mastered it reminded me why I love teaching. Watching Emily grow into such a strong, beautiful woman has been the greatest privilege of my life. I wrote a letter to accompany the album, pouring my heart onto the pages in handwriting that shook with emotion and desperate hope. I told Emily about the sleepless nights I had spent worrying that I was being too demanding, the constant second-guessing of my own parenting choices, the overwhelming love that had motivated every difficult decision I had ever made. My dearest Emily, I wrote, I know that you remember our relationship differently than I do, and I know that my expectations and demands caused you pain that I never intended. But I want you to see these pictures and remember that there was also joy, pride, and so much love between us. I was never trying to control you or make you into someone you weren't. I was trying to give you the tools you would need to become whoever you were meant to be. Late one evening, I drove to Emily's house and left the album on her doorstep, hoping that when she saw those captured moments of genuine happiness and connection, something in her heart might remember the mother who had loved her unconditionally despite our differences. For 3 days, I allowed myself to hope that my gesture might reach whatever love remained in Emily's heart. I imagined her looking through the photos and remembering the excitement we had shared over her progress, the pride we had both felt in her achievements, the countless moments when our relationship had been built on mutual respect and shared dreams. Then I saw Brenda's social media post, and my world collapsed completely. The photograph showed my carefully crafted album torn into pieces, its pages scattered across what looked like a garbage bin. The photos I had chosen so carefully, images of Emily's childhood joy, of our shared love for dance, of moments when we had been genuinely happy together, had been deliberately destroyed and discarded like worthless trash. The caption read, "Cleaning out the clutter." Some people just can't let go of the past and keep trying to manipulate family members with old photos and guilt trips. Time to move forward from negativity and desperate attempts to control others. Healthy boundaries, untoxic family, moving on. Seeing those irreplaceable memories, those moments of pure love and authentic connection destroyed and thrown away like garbage was more than my heart could bear. I collapsed onto my kitchen floor, sobbing uncontrollably as the full weight of their cruelty crashed over me. The realization that Emily had not only rejected my plea for understanding, but had actively participated in this ultimate act of erasure was devastating beyond words. Daniel's response was swift and merciless. Within hours of Brenda's post, my phone buzzed with a text message that was crueler than anything he had ever said directly. "Consider this closed, Linda. Don't contact us again, ever. You're causing too much trouble with your inability to accept reality and move on." But even that wasn't enough for them. Emily began calling mutual friends and distant relatives, spreading a carefully crafted narrative that painted me as mentally unstable and dangerously fixated on a past that existed only in my imagination. The cruelest blow of all came when I learned that my grandson Jake, now 12 years old, had been coached to make public statements about me. During a family gathering that I wasn't invited to, Jake had apparently laughed and said, "Grandma's crazy. She's always telling these boring stories about when Mom was little. Why doesn't she just give up and leave us alone? Maybe she should just die already." The casual cruelty of those words coming from a child I had helped raise and loved unconditionally was almost unbearable, but it also crystallized something important for me. This wasn't just about differing memories of Emily's childhood. This was about something much darker, a systematic campaign to erase me from my family's life and rewrite our entire history. It was then, in my deepest despair, that I finally revealed the most devastating secret of my past to Dr. Sarah Chen, the psychotherapist who had become my lifeline during this nightmare. The weight of keeping this burden alone had become unbearable, and her compassionate professional presence finally gave me the courage to speak the truth I had hidden for nearly 30 years. There's something about Emily's health that makes her current accusations even more heartbreaking. I began, my voice barely above a whisper. Something I've never told anyone, something I promised myself I would take to my grave to protect her from a truth that would have destroyed her childhood. Dr. Chen waited patiently as I gathered the courage to continue her gentle presence, giving me the strength to finally break the silence that had protected my daughter's peace of mind for decades. When Emily was born, there were some complications that led me to have extensive genetic testing done. What I discovered was that Emily had inherited a genetic predisposition to a degenerative neurological condition that would eventually affect her motor control and coordination. The words came out in a rush, decades of suppressed terror and protective instinct finally finding voice. The doctors told me that the condition would likely manifest in her 20s or 30s, that there was no cure, and that it would gradually rob her of the physical abilities that were so central to her identity as a dancer. Dr. Chen's face remained carefully neutral, but I could see the understanding dawning in her eyes as the full implications of what I was telling her became clear. I made a decision that has haunted me every day since. I continued, tears streaming down my face. I chose not to tell Emily about her genetic predisposition, not to burden her childhood with the knowledge of what was coming. Instead, I dedicated myself to giving her the strongest possible foundation of physical training and mental discipline, hoping that if her body was as prepared as possible, she might be able to fight the condition longer when it finally appeared. I told Dr. Chen about the specialized training I had designed specifically for Emily, the way I had pushed her to develop not just grace and artistry, but the kind of physical strength and mental resilience that might help her when her body began to betray her. I described how I had spent over $200,000 on the finest instructors, the most advanced training techniques, and experimental therapies that might slow the progression of her eventual symptoms. Every demanding class, every high expectation, every moment when I pushed her to exceed her limits was motivated by my knowledge that her time as a healthy, fully functional person was limited, I whispered. I was trying to give her as much strength and skill as possible before the disease took it all away. The cosmic irony was unbearable. Emily's current accusations that I had pushed her too hard, that I had cared more about her performance than her happiness, were based on her complete ignorance of the race. Against time I had been running, to prepare her for a battle she didn't even know was coming. The worst part, I concluded, is that Emily is now 28 and she's still healthy. The condition may never manifest, or it may not appear for another decade. I may have put her through all that training and pressure for a future that will never come to pass. But I couldn't take the risk. I couldn't face the possibility that I hadn't given her every tool she might need to fight. The silence in Dr. Chen's office was profound as the weight of my confession settled between us. I had protected my daughter from a devastating truth, only to watch her use that protection against me, characterizing my love as abuse and my sacrifice as manipulation. The betrayal was complete, the irony devastating, and the price of my protective love higher than I had ever imagined it could be. But for the first time in months, I also felt something else, a cold, determined clarity about what needed to happen next. Some secrets are too heavy to carry alone. Some truths are too important to remain buried. And some fights for the integrity of maternal love are worth having, no matter what they cost or who gets hurt in the process. The real battle for my daughter's understanding was about to begin. In the weeks that followed the restraining order and the revelation of my devastating secret to Dr. Chen, I found myself trapped in a psychological prison more terrifying than any physical confinement I could have imagined. The weight of Emily's hidden genetic condition combined with the legal prohibition against contacting my own family, created a suffocating isolation that pressed down on me like a heavy stage curtain falling on my life's final performance. Every morning, I would wake up in my small apartment and remember anew that I was utterly alone with the truth. The monumental secret of what I had done to protect Emily from her genetic predisposition burned inside me like acid eating away at my sense of reality and purpose. For 40 years, I had been a nurturing guide, someone who helped young dancers discover their potential and build confidence through discipline and artistic expression. Now I was drowning in the most profound moral crisis of my life, questioning every choice I had made and wondering if my protective love had somehow become the very thing that destroyed our relationship. The isolation was made infinitely worse by Daniel and Brenda's systematic campaign to destroy not just my family relationships, but my entire professional legacy as well. What I didn't realize at first was how methodically they were working to obliterate every aspect of my identity and credibility in the dance community. Brenda began what she called a wellness inquiry regarding my mental state, subtly contacting ballet associations and dance schools with carefully crafted concerns about my declining emotional stability. She painted a picture of a once respected instructor who was now experiencing severe cognitive deterioration, someone who had developed unstable emotional attachments to her students and was no longer capable of maintaining appropriate boundaries in artistic instruction. Linda Harrison has been exhibiting increasingly problematic behavior, she would say in her concerned professional tone. Her family has been forced to seek legal protection due to her obsessive fixation on controlling her former students' career choices and personal lives. There are serious questions about her ability to maintain the professional standards that are essential for working with vulnerable young artists. The impact was swift and devastating. Quietly, without any formal announcement, I began receiving polite but firm cancellations from dance workshops where I had been scheduled to teach master classes. The Regional Ballet Association stopped including me in their newsletter updates. A Lifetime Achievement Award that had been planned by the local Arts Council suddenly found budget constraints that made the ceremony impossible. My reputation for precise instruction and compassionate guidance, built over 4 decades of dedicated teaching, was being systematically obliterated. Former colleagues who had once sought my expertise now avoided my calls. The dance studios where I had taught for years treated me like a pariah, as if my very presence might contaminate their reputation for nurturing young talent. The financial consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The escalating legal fees from defending myself against the restraining order and Emily's defamation lawsuit completely drained my modest savings account. When Daniel reported concerns about my financial management to protect me from myself, my bank accounts were frozen pending investigation into my supposed mental incompetence. The eviction notice came on a bitter March morning. I stared at the legal document written in the same cold clinical language as the restraining order and realized that I was about to lose the last physical connection to my identity as a teacher and mother. Within 30 days, my cherished home filled with decades of dance memorabilia and family photographs would be sold at public auction to cover my legal debts. The day of the auction was the most humiliating experience of my 64 years. I stood across the street, watching strangers rifle through my possessions, putting price tags on items that held immeasurable personal and artistic value. My collection of ballet programs, my teaching awards, the thousands of photographs from student recitals that represented years of nurturing young talent. Everything was reduced to lots and dollar amounts sold to the highest bidder. I ended up in a crowded, impersonal public shelter, sleeping on a narrow cot surrounded by people whose circumstances had stripped them of dignity, just as mine had been stripped from me. The irony wasn't lost on me that I, who had spent my life teaching young people about grace and poise, was now among society's most vulnerable and forgotten. But the cruelest blow was yet to come, and it involved the two people I loved most in the world, after Emily, my grandchildren, Emma and Jake. Daniel and Emily, with Brenda's calculating guidance, decided to leverage my grandchildren in what they called a childhood trauma and healing awareness campaign. They connected with a well-funded local counseling center that was launching an initiative about overcoming emotional damage from difficult family relationships. I learned about it the same way the rest of the world did, through a professionally produced video that went viral on social media. The setting was warm and therapeutic, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture designed to make the speakers appear trustworthy and emotionally healthy. Emma, now 16, and looking heartbreakingly like Emily at that age, stood beside a display about emotional wellness and delivered a rehearsed speech about navigating emotional challenges from difficult family histories. "Sometimes," she said, looking directly into the camera with eyes that once lit up when I taught her simple ballet positions, "we have to protect ourselves from people who say they love us, but actually cause us emotional harm. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is create distance from family members who can't understand that their expectations were hurtful." The words were clearly not her own, but hearing them in her voice, seeing her used as a spokesperson to legitimize her family's rejection of me, shattered something fundamental inside me. Jake's contribution was even more devastating in its calculated innocence. The 14-year-old I had taught to appreciate music and movement stood beside a drawing he had made of a happy, peaceful family. The picture showed Daniel, Emily, Emma, and himself all smiling and holding hands in a circle. I was nowhere to be found. "This is what family looks like when everyone feels safe and supported," he said, his voice sweet and confident. "When we don't have to worry about people who try to control us or make us feel bad about not being perfect." The video ended with a message about the importance of recognizing toxic family patterns and the courage required to break cycles of emotional abuse. My own grandchildren had been turned into weapons against me, their innocent faces used to legitimize a narrative that painted my love as a form of psychological harm. I spent that night on my narrow shelter cot staring at the ceiling and wondering if this was how people lost their sanity. The psychological torture of being legally separated from my family while watching them use my most precious relationships against me was almost unbearable. But just when I thought I had reached the bottom of despair, an unexpected lifeline appeared. The letter arrived at the shelter, forwarded from my old address. It was from Isabella Rodriguez, a former student I had taught nearly 20 years ago when she was a struggling teenager from a troubled home. She was now a principal dancer with the American Ballet Theater, and she had seen news coverage of my legal troubles. "Madame Harrison," she wrote, using the formal address that my most dedicated students had always preferred, "I don't understand all the details of what's happening with your family situation, but I know your character and your influence on my life. The woman who saved me from a path of self-destruction, who taught me that discipline and beauty could coexist, who showed me that dance could be both demanding and healing, could never be the person they're describing in the media." She included a check for $25,000 and the contact information for a network of retired legal professionals who specialized in elder abuse and family manipulation cases. These people understand how love can be twisted into something unrecognizable by those who don't understand the difference between demanding excellence and causing harm, she wrote. Let them help you fight for the truth about who you really are. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of the fierce determination that had carried me through 40 years of teaching challenging students and helping them discover their potential. I was not going to let Daniel's lies destroy everything I had worked for, everything I believed in, everything that made my years of sacrifice for Emily meaningful. The war was far from over, but I finally had allies who understood what was really at stake. This wasn't just about family relationships or parenting styles. This was about the fundamental question of whether love and dedication could survive when confronted by organized deception and the systematic rewriting of history. The next phase of Daniel and Emily's campaign against me was so audacious, so perfectly calculated to destroy everything I held sacred that I might have admired its choreography if it hadn't been aimed at obliterating my life's work and artistic legacy. Using Daniel's network of business contacts and Brenda's extensive social connections, they orchestrated something truly diabolical, a highly publicized national conference called Healing Through Movement, Overcoming Rigid Structures in Dance and Life. The event was scheduled to take place at the very convention center where I had attended professional development seminars for decades, in the space where I had celebrated countless achievements in dance education and student success. The conference claimed to address the growing problem of emotional rigidity in traditional dance training, particularly involving elderly instructors who might be suffering from outdated pedagogical approaches that could cause psychological harm to young students. Daniel was announced as the keynote speaker, billed as a movement therapy expert who had successfully transformed his family's relationship with perfectionism and artistic expression. When Isabella learned about the conference through her contacts in the dance world, I felt physically ill. Daniel and Emily were using my own professional arena, my own area of expertise, as the stage for my public execution. They were turning the very dance community, where I had built my reputation, into a platform for promoting the opposite of everything I had ever stood for. I managed to watch the live stream from a computer at the public library, sitting in a corner where the other patrons couldn't see the tears streaming down my face. Daniel took the stage looking confident and authoritative, wearing a casual but expensive outfit that made him appear both approachable and successful. His presentation was a masterpiece of manipulation. Without ever mentioning my name directly, he told the story of an elderly dance instructor whose obsession with technical perfection had made it impossible for her to recognize the emotional damage she was causing to students and family members. He described how this woman's beautiful but destructive attachment to traditional methods had nearly destroyed a loving family's ability to embrace authentic movement and emotional expression. Sometimes, Daniel said, his voice carrying the perfect tone of sad wisdom, our artistic training becomes a prison rather than a pathway to freedom. We become so attached to rigid structures and impossible standards that we lose sight of the joy and healing that movement can bring. This particular case study shows how dangerous it can be when someone confuses technical excellence with genuine artistic expression. The audience of movement therapists, progressive dance educators, and wellness professionals nodded knowingly. Here was a man who understood the real world, who could see past the outdated methods that trapped lesser minds. But the knife twisted deeper when Emily took the stage for a panel discussion on family dynamics in artistic training. She spoke about me with the practiced vulnerability of someone who had rehearsed this performance many times. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love become increasingly disconnected from the emotional impact of their teaching methods. She said, her voice heavy with false sadness. My mother's technical skills were always impressive, but as she's gotten older, they've become more about control and perfection than about nurturing artistic growth. She simply cannot accept that movement should be joyful and healing rather than demanding and stressful. The moderator asked gentle, leading questions about the challenges of dealing with elderly relatives who might be experiencing professional rigidity combined with cognitive decline. Emily painted a picture of a family torn apart by one person's inability to adapt to contemporary understanding of healthy artistic development. But the most devastating moment came when they showed a pre-recorded video featuring Emma, now 16, and clearly uncomfortable, but going through with her scripted lines anyway. My beloved granddaughter, the girl whose natural grace had reminded me so much of Emily at that age, spoke about her newfound emotional freedom and the importance of moving beyond old rigid structures. My grandmother taught me about dance technique. She said, her voice carefully neutral. But I've learned that real artistic expression comes from inside, not from following someone else's strict rules. True movement should make you feel free and happy, not worried about being perfect all the time. The implicit message was clear. Linda's teaching methods were emotionally harmful, anachronisms disconnected from the enlightened understanding of how art should nurture rather than constrain young spirits. Even her own granddaughter had outgrown her grandmother's oppressive approach to dance. The final twist of the knife came in a short video clip featuring Jake, now 14, and giggling as he pointed at an old pair of ballet slippers. "Grandma used to make us wear these stiff, uncomfortable shoes," he said, laughing. "So old-fashioned we prefer barefoot dancing and free movement now." The audience chuckled appreciatively. Here was the next generation freed from the restrictive methods that had trapped their elder, ready to embrace more authentic approaches to movement and self-expression. I sat in that library chair, watching my life's work being systematically dismantled and used as a cautionary tale about the dangers of traditional dance training. The irony was unbearable. Daniel, a man who had never spent a day teaching young dancers or nurturing artistic growth, was being celebrated as an expert in healthy movement education. But just as I was about to close the laptop and flee from this nightmare, something unexpected happened. The camera panned across the audience, and I caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, Mikhail Petrov, a renowned choreographer who had been a student of my mentor decades ago and had always respected the classical training methods I championed. Mikhail looked disgusted. His face showed the same expression of revulsion I remembered from master classes when someone would attempt to shortcut the fundamental techniques that were essential for safe and beautiful dancing. He was shaking his head, clearly seeing through the elaborate performance being staged on that platform. After the conference ended, I received an email that gave me the first real hope I had felt in weeks. Mikhail had tracked down my contact information through Isabella and reached out to express his outrage at what he had witnessed. "Linda," he wrote, "what I saw today was an abomination. Whoever orchestrated that conference has turned dance education into a weapon against truth and artistic integrity. I don't know the details of your family situation, but I know your teaching, and I know when I'm watching ignorance being dressed up as enlightenment." He offered something precious, a professional statement, vouching for my teaching methods and artistic judgment based on decades of observing my students' success and growth. More importantly, he put me in touch with Isabella's network of legal professionals sharing his suspicions that something much more calculated was happening behind the scenes. Mikhail had been quietly investigating the funding sources for the Healing Through Movement conference, and what he had discovered was disturbing. The event had been financially backed by several wellness organizations with documented histories of promoting anti-traditional educational approaches, groups that use therapeutic language to disguise fundamentally commercial motives. "Your family isn't just attacking you personally, Linda," he wrote. "They've allied themselves with people who represent everything you've spent your career upholding. This isn't about family dynamics anymore. This is about whether traditional artistic training can survive when it's attacked by organized ignorance disguised as progressive thinking. The fight for my principles, my reputation, and my family's integrity had just gained a powerful new dimension. The truth was finally beginning to find champions who could help me expose the elaborate network of lies and pseudo-therapeutic manipulation that had consumed my life." The final financial assault came with the precision of a perfectly executed ballet combination coordinated across multiple stages to ensure my complete destruction. Daniel, with Brenda's full support and Emily's passive compliance, launched what he called his comprehensive resolution, a devastating legal and financial attack designed to render me not just homeless, but utterly powerless to continue fighting for the truth. The lawsuit arrived like a devastating grand jeté, so massive in scope that even my battle-hardened legal allies were stunned by its audacity. Daniel filed a $1 million claim against me for emotional distress, intentional interference with family relationships, and malicious defamation stemming from what he characterized as my prolonged campaign of psychological manipulation against their family's emotional well-being. The legal documents crafted by his attorney with surgical precision painted me as a vindictive old woman who had orchestrated a systematic campaign of emotional terrorism against her own family. They cited my obsessive fixation on controlling Emily's life choices, my delusional insistence on maintaining inappropriate contact despite clear boundaries, and my manipulative attempts to use my professional reputation to undermine their family's peace and stability. But the lawsuit was only the opening movement. While I was scrambling to find legal representation, I couldn't afford Daniel launched a parallel attack on my remaining professional standing and financial security. He contacted my former ballet school administrators and retirement fund managers with what he called grave concerns about my mental competence and my fitness to manage my own financial affairs. His evidence was compelling to anyone who didn't know the full story. He presented the restraining order as proof of my dangerous obsession with controlling my family. He shared carefully edited recordings of our conversations that made my desperate pleas for understanding sound like the manipulative tactics of an unhinged person. He even provided testimony from Emily about their growing concerns over my increasingly erratic behavior and my inability to distinguish between professional mentoring and personal interference. Linda Harrison has become fixated on the idea that her teaching expertise gives her authority over her adult daughter's life choices, Daniel told the Professional Review Board. She's lost the ability to maintain appropriate boundaries, and our family is genuinely concerned about her capacity to handle sensitive financial decisions that affect other people's well-being. The result was swift and devastating. The State Dance Educators Association, citing concerns about potential liability and maintaining public trust in professional instruction, voted to permanently revoke my teaching credentials. They characterized their decision as protecting young students from someone who had been legally determined to be emotionally unstable and whose professional judgment had been called into serious question. My pension benefits, accumulated over 4 decades of distinguished teaching, were stripped away under a clause about conduct inconsistent with professional standards. The Regional Ballet Association, that had been planning to establish a scholarship in my name, suddenly found ethical concerns that made the honor impossible. Within 6 months, I went from having a modest but secure retirement income to being completely destitute. The legal fees from defending against Daniel's massive lawsuit consumed the emergency fund Isabella had helped me establish. The loss of my pension eliminated any hope of long-term financial stability. The eviction from my temporary shelter accommodation came on a sweltering July morning, timed with cruel precision to ensure maximum humiliation. Brenda had somehow arranged for local media to be present, ostensibly covering a story about housing challenges for seniors with mental health issues. The footage that aired on the evening news showed me standing on the sidewalk with my few remaining possessions in garbage bags, a formerly respected educator reduced to visible homelessness. The reporter's voiceover was devastating. "This is Linda Harrison, a retired ballet instructor whose family disputes and legal troubles have led to housing instability. Local social services are working to provide support for seniors who may be struggling with the complex challenges of family estrangement and financial management." I watched myself on that television screen, standing in the heat with everything I owned in trash bags, and barely recognized the broken woman I had become. The dignified teacher who had once commanded respect in studios and theaters had been transformed into a cautionary tale about what happens when elderly people become obsessed with controlling their adult children's lives. Daniel and Emily's response to my homelessness was perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire ordeal. When reporters asked Daniel about his mother-in-law's situation, he delivered a statement that Brenda had clearly crafted for maximum impact. "Linda is struggling with some difficult personal and emotional issues right now," he said, his voice heavy with practiced sadness. "We've tried to help her understand that her teaching methods don't translate to healthy family relationships, but sometimes you have to accept that you can't change someone who refuses to acknowledge the harm their behavior has caused." Emily's response was even more calculated in its cruelty. She posted on social media about her incredibly busy schedule with the children's activities and her own wellness journey, subtly implying that my problems were self-created drama that she simply didn't have time to deal with. When she encountered me on the street near the shelter, she literally looked away and crossed to the other side, unable or unwilling to face the suffering she had helped create. But the cruelest twist of all came when Brenda decided to celebrate their victory with a gesture so audacious that it took my breath away. Using money that she and Daniel had derived from my stolen retirement savings and the proceeds from my home's forced sale, over $800,000 in total assets that should have supported my final years, she made a highly publicized purchase of a custom-built dance studio for Emily. The dedication ceremony was covered by local media as a heartwarming story of family members supporting each other's artistic pursuits. Brenda stood beside state-of-the-art mirrors and equipment, smiling for cameras as she spoke about the importance of healthy movement practices and healing through dance. "This studio will help Emily provide the kind of nurturing, joyful dance instruction that builds confidence rather than fear," she announced. "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is invest in approaches that heal rather than harm, that inspire rather than intimidate." The photographs were shared widely on social media, transforming my stolen legacy into a trophy celebrating their enlightened parenting and commitment to emotional wellness. They had taken my life savings, used it to destroy my reputation, and then turned it into a monument to their supposed superiority. The physical toll of this relentless assault finally overwhelmed my body's ability to cope. One morning in late July, as I was walking from the shelter to the library, where I spent my days researching legal options I couldn't afford to pursue, my chest exploded with pain, and the world went black. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital intensive care unit, connected to machines that were apparently keeping me alive. The doctor, a kind man about Daniel's age, explained that I had suffered a massive heart attack brought on by severe stress and malnutrition. My body, he said gently, had simply reached its breaking point. As I lay there in that hospital bed floating in and out of consciousness, I experienced something that felt like a vivid dream, but somehow more real than my waking life. I was back in my studio 25 years earlier, preparing for a major recital that would showcase my students' talents to the entire dance community. In the dream, I was frantically working to cover up a serious technical flaw in the stage construction that could have resulted in serious injuries if anyone had discovered it during the performance. The memory was so vivid, so clearly a real moment, that I had somehow suppressed that it felt like my subconscious was trying to tell me something crucial about the nature of perfection and the dangerous secrets we keep to protect the people we love. When I fully regained consciousness, I understood with crystalline clarity what my mind was trying to tell me. This entire nightmare, this systematic destruction of my family and my life, was connected to a pattern of protective deception that had defined my entire relationship with Emily. I had spent decades hiding truths and covering up problems to preserve her happiness, and now those same protective instincts were being used against me by people who had no understanding of the love that had motivated my choices. The memory of that hidden flaw in the stage ignited something fierce and unbreakable in my chest, something that the heart attack couldn't touch. I was going to fight back, not just for my own vindication or my family's reconciliation, but for the truth about what love really means and the difference between protection and control. From my hospital bed, slowly recovering from the heart attack that had nearly ended my fight before it truly began, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. The machines monitoring my vital signs beeped steadily as I dictated what I knew might be my final message to the world. With the help of Carmen Santos, the compassionate nurse, who had become my unlikely ally, I recorded a video that contained everything I had been legally prohibited from saying. In that raw, emotional recording, I didn't make accusations or demands for apologies. Instead, I simply told the truth about my lifelong dedication to nurturing young dancers and my profound regret over the ways my protective love for Emily had been misunderstood. I spoke about the impossible balance between demanding excellence and providing emotional support, between preparing students for a competitive world and preserving their joy in movement. Most importantly, I played the unedited audio recordings I had secretly made during our family meetings, conversations that revealed the true nature of Daniel's manipulation and financial opportunism. His voice filled the quiet hospital room as he outlined his strategy for gaining control of my assets. Linda's getting older and more emotional about this family stuff. If we can make it look like she's becoming unstable, we can probably get conservatorship and manage her finances for her own good. Brenda's voice joined the conversation with chilling calculation. The key is documenting her erratic behavior and getting Emily to support our concerns. Once we have medical professionals questioning her competence, we can move on the financial stuff. But the most devastating evidence was a recording from a conversation I had overheard between Daniel and a man I didn't recognize, where Daniel had boasted about his long-term strategy. The old lady has been hoarding money for years, and Emily's too soft to fight for what's rightfully ours. All this dance teacher respect and community standing, we can use that against her if we're smart about it, Daniel. I said, looking directly into the camera with whatever strength I had left, I know you're listening to people who have convinced you that I'm the enemy, but somewhere inside you, you know the truth about who I really am. You've seen me with Emily and the children when we were all happy together. You know I never tried to control or manipulate anyone. I only tried to love and protect my family the best way I knew how. I was careful not to reveal the full details of Emily's genetic condition or the massive financial sacrifices I had made over the years. Those secrets were still too dangerous, too potentially devastating. But I alluded to the complex challenges of parenting and the way love sometimes looks like strictness to people who don't understand the full context. Everyone deserves to know the truth about the people they love. I continued, tears streaming down my face. Please, don't let fear and misunderstanding destroy what took a lifetime to build. Carmen Santos, who had watched the entire recording with tears in her eyes, promised to personally deliver the message to Daniel and Emily's home. She was as invested in seeing justice done as I was, having witnessed firsthand the cruel campaign that had nearly killed me. But what we didn't know was that Brenda had systematically bribed several staff members at the hospital to monitor my communications and report back to her about my condition and activities. The orderly, who was supposed to deliver my message, instead handed it directly to Brenda, who intercepted it before Daniel could ever see the full recording. What happened next was so coldly calculated, so perfectly evil in its sophistication, that it took my breath away even after everything I had already endured. Brenda didn't simply destroy the recording. Instead, she took my raw, emotional plea for understanding and twisted it into the final weapon against me. Using sophisticated digital editing software, she carefully manipulated the audio and video, altering the tone of my voice, splicing sentences together out of context, and adding ominous background noise that made my desperate appeals sound like the paranoid ravings of an unhinged mind. She cut my heartfelt memories of Emily's childhood in such a way that they sounded like obsessive fixations. She altered the audio of my recordings to make them sound like me rehearsing fictional scenarios designed to frame innocent people. Most devastating of all, she edited my direct appeal to Daniel's conscience to make it sound like I was trying to manipulate him with false guilt and emotional blackmail. The doctored video was then sold to a prominent national news channel for a substantial sum, framed as exclusive footage that provided disturbing proof of my mental deterioration following my heart attack. The story ran with the headline, "Retired Dance Teacher's Delusional Hospital Rants Reveal Dangerous Family Obsession." The edited version painted me as a dying woman, consumed by paranoid delusions, desperately trying to blackmail her own family and defame innocent relatives with elaborate conspiracy theories about financial manipulation and emotional abuse. The network's expert commentator, a psychologist who had never met me, analyzed my obvious signs of cognitive decline and my textbook pattern of elder paranoia combined with artistic delusion. When Daniel appeared on national television the next day for what was billed as an exclusive interview about dealing with a family member's mental illness, my heart shattered completely. This man, who had married into my family and systematically destroyed my relationship with my daughter, sat in a professional studio, and delivered a performance that Brenda had clearly orchestrated with surgical precision. This is incredibly difficult for our family. Daniel said, his voice heavy with what appeared to be genuine emotion. Linda was once a respected teacher, someone who influenced many young dancers in positive ways. But watching her deteriorate like this, seeing her become consumed by these paranoid fantasies about family conspiracies and financial manipulation, has been heartbreaking for all of us, especially Emily. The interviewer asked gentle leading questions about the challenges of dealing with elderly relatives who might be experiencing artistic obsession combined with cognitive decline. Daniel spoke about the difficult decision to seek legal protection from my increasingly erratic behavior and the painful necessity of stepping back for the sake of his family's emotional well-being. The most devastating moment came when Emma, now 16, and clearly uncomfortable, but following her scripted lines, appeared on camera beside her father. My beloved granddaughter, looking sad and worried, spoke about how much she loved me, but how frightening it had become to watch my mental state deteriorate. "We really hope Grandma can get the help she needs," she said, her voice carefully coached to sound both loving and concerned. "But right now, we just need to focus on protecting our family and staying healthy." Emily appeared in the same segment, offering subtle nods of agreement and looks of feigned sympathy, publicly reinforcing Daniel's narrative and making it clear that the entire family stood united against my delusions. Her presence eliminated any possibility that viewers might see Daniel's position as anything other than the consensus view of people who knew me best. The viral video and the television interviews created a perfect storm of public humiliation that reached millions of people. Social media exploded with commentary about the crazy dance teacher who was tormenting her own family with artistic delusions. The story became a cautionary tale about what happens when professional expertise becomes dangerous obsession in elderly minds. But in my darkest hour, when it seemed that Brenda's manipulation had succeeded beyond even her wildest dreams, an unexpected champion emerged from the shadows. Isabella Rodriguez, who had been quietly investigating the situation since the dance conference, had been carefully analyzing the viral video with the same methodical approach she had once applied to mastering complex choreography. Her years of experience with digital media production and her intimate knowledge of my character had led her to some disturbing conclusions. Working with a team of technical experts, she had discovered irrefutable proof of the digital manipulation that had transformed my desperate plea for truth into evidence of my supposed mental illness. The metadata, the audio analysis, the video compression artifacts, everything pointed to sophisticated editing designed to distort my message beyond recognition. More importantly, her investigation into Daniel's background had uncovered a pattern of financial manipulation that extended far beyond my family's situation. Daniel wasn't just stealing from his own relatives. He was systematically defrauding multiple elderly clients through his movement therapy practice, using his apparent expertise in family wellness to gain access to vulnerable seniors and their financial resources. The evidence Isabella had compiled was substantial enough to interest federal investigators and powerful enough to finally give me the leverage I needed to fight back against the elaborate network of lies and therapeutic manipulation that had consumed my life. As I lay in that hospital bed, reading Isabella's preliminary findings on her laptop, I felt something I hadn't experienced in almost a year: hope. Not just for my own vindication, but for justice itself. The truth was finally beginning to surface, and those who had worked so hard to bury it were about to discover that some things cannot be destroyed, no matter how much sophistication and cruelty you use against them. The real battle was just beginning, and this time I had an army of artists and truth-tellers standing behind me. Isabella's evidence proved to be the key that unlocked everything. Within weeks of her preliminary findings reaching the right authorities, I found myself at the center of a legal earthquake that would reshape not only my family's future, but the entire national conversation about elder abuse and family manipulation in America. The funding for my legal battle came from an unexpected source, a collection of rare dance notation manuscripts I had preserved over decades that were now worth nearly $300,000 to museums and private collectors. These documents, which chronicled the evolution of classical ballet techniques, had been gathering dust in my home for years. Now they became the foundation for my fight for justice and truth. My legal team was formidable. Mikhail Petrov, the renowned choreographer, who lent his international reputation to my cause. Dr. Patricia Chen, a retired forensic accountant with decades of experience in complex financial fraud cases. And most powerfully, Rebecca Martinez, an aggressive elder abuse attorney who had built her career on cases exactly like mine. Together, they launched a massive federal civil and criminal lawsuit against Daniel Brenda and their attorney for fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, and national defamation. The case attracted global attention almost immediately. Here was a story that resonated with millions of families struggling with financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and the complex dynamics of aging in modern America. Media outlets from around the world sent reporters to cover what was being called the dance teacher manipulation trial of the decade. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment when the truth finally exploded into the light. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity with overflow seating for media and members of the public who had followed my story through the viral videos and international coverage. Cameras rolled as Judge Sarah Mitchell called the session to order, and I felt my heart pounding as Rebecca Martinez approached the evidence table. Your Honor, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. We are about to present audio evidence that will demonstrate beyond any shadow of doubt the calculated nature of the fraud and elder abuse perpetrated against Mrs. Linda Harrison. The first recording was Daniel's voice captured during one of our family meetings when I had been secretly documenting his increasingly aggressive demands. His words filled the courtroom with chilling clarity. Linda's getting older and more sentimental about this family stuff. If we play this right, we can probably get conservatorship and control her finances. The old lady's been hoarding money for years, and Emily's too soft to fight for what's rightfully ours. A gasp went through the courtroom, but Rebecca wasn't finished. The next recording was even more devastating. Daniel speaking to Brenda about their long-term strategy. The dance teacher thing works in our favor, Daniel's voice continued. All that community respect and professional reputation, we can use it against her if we're smart. Make it look like she's becoming obsessive about her students losing touch with reality. Get some medical professionals to question her competence, and we can move on the financial stuff. But the most crushing blow came with the third recording, a conversation between Daniel and Brenda that revealed the true depths of their cruelty. Once we get control of her money, we need to make sure she doesn't cause problems, Brenda's voice said clearly. The restraining order was genius. Now we just need to wait for her to have another health crisis. At her age, with all this stress, it shouldn't take long. Maybe she'll just die already and save us all the trouble. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about financial exploitation. It was about a systematic campaign designed to hasten my death for monetary gain. When Daniel was called to testify, the man who took the witness stand bore little resemblance to the confident manipulator who had orchestrated this nightmare. Confronted with the undeniable evidence of his own words, his carefully constructed facade began to crumble in real time. "Mr. Daniel Harrison," Rebecca said calmly, "do you recognize the voice on these recordings discussing how to obtain conservatorship over your mother-in-law's finances?" Daniel's hands shook as he gripped the witness stand. I was trying to protect my family," he whispered. "You don't understand the pressure we were under. Linda was becoming erratic, and we thought she needed help managing her affairs." "So, you admit that you conspired with Mrs. Thompson to manipulate medical professionals and legal authorities in order to gain control of Mrs. Harrison's assets." "I never meant for it to go this far." Daniel's voice broke completely. "I thought we could just help her make better decisions. I never thought it would destroy everything." As the weight of his public confession settled over him, Daniel suffered what could only be described as a complete psychological collapse. He began sobbing uncontrollably, his body shaking so violently that the bailiff had to steady him in his chair. The sight of this man who had systematically destroyed my life for over 2 years, reduced to a broken, weeping figure, was both vindicating and heartbreaking. Brenda's attempt to flee the courtroom only made her guilt more obvious. She was apprehended in the hallway by court security, her careful composure finally cracking as she realized that her role as the primary architect of this conspiracy had been exposed. The woman who had helped spread lies and coordinate attacks broke down in desperate tears, her social ambitions lying in ruins around her. Their attorney, Mr. Davies, was immediately taken into custody. His disbarment proceedings would begin within days, and criminal charges for conspiracy and obstruction of justice would follow. But the most devastating moment of all came when I saw Emily in the courtroom gallery. She had been sitting quietly throughout the proceedings, her face growing paler with each revelation. When the recordings revealed the full scope of Daniel's manipulation and Brenda's cruelty, when she heard them discussing my potential death as a convenient solution to their problems, something fundamental broke inside her. Emily began crying. Not the controlled tears of someone performing grief, but the raw, agonized sobs of a woman who was finally understanding the magnitude of what had been done in her name. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with the force of her realization. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were filled with such profound remorse and shame that it took my breath away. She didn't approach me. The chasm between us was still too deep, the wound still too fresh. But in that moment, I saw a glimpse of the daughter I had loved so fiercely, finally understanding the truth about who had really been trying to destroy our family. The sight of Emily's tears, the sound of Daniel's broken confessions, the complete exposure of Brenda's calculated cruelty, all of it together created a moment of such profound vindication that I could barely process the emotions flooding through me. Justice was finally being served, but the cost had been higher than I ever could have imagined. My family lay in ruins. My daughter was traumatized by the truth about her husband's character, and years of my life had been consumed by a battle I never should have had to fight. Still, as I sat in that courtroom, surrounded by the evidence of my vindication and the support of people who had believed in my truth, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over 2 years: peace. The nightmare was finally ending, and the people who had tried to bury me were about to discover that some things, truth, justice, and the love of a mother for her child, cannot be destroyed by any amount of manipulation or cruelty. The court's verdict came down like the final curtain call of the most important performance of my life. Judge Mitchell's voice carried the weight of absolute moral authority as she delivered her ruling, speaking not just to the defendants before her, but to a nation grappling with questions of elder abuse and family exploitation. This court finds the defendants guilty on all counts of criminal elder abuse, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and defamation, she announced. Mr. Daniel Harrison, your systematic campaign of psychological manipulation and your orchestrated theft of your mother-in-law's life savings represent crimes of extraordinary cruelty and premeditation. You are sentenced to 10 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 7 years. Daniel, still broken from his courtroom collapse, could barely stand as the sentence was read. The man who had launched this nightmare with such calculating confidence was now facing the reality that his greed had cost him not just his freedom, but his entire future and his family. Mrs. Brenda Thompson. The judge continued, her voice heavy with disgust. Your role as the primary architect of this conspiracy and your callous discussions about hastening Mrs. Harrison's death represent a particularly heinous form of elder abuse. You are sentenced to 7 years in federal prison with mandatory participation in psychological counseling programs. Brenda's sentencing felt like the closing of a dark chapter that had consumed years of my life. The woman who had orchestrated so much of my suffering now faced years of the same isolation and powerlessness she had tried to impose on me. Their attorney received 5 years for his role in enabling the fraud and obstruction of justice. His legal career was over, his reputation destroyed, his future defined by the crimes he had committed in service of Daniel's greed. But perhaps more important than the prison sentences was Judge Mitchell's formal statement vindicating my character and explicitly dismantling the false narrative that had been constructed around my supposed mental decline and emotional instability. This court wishes to state unequivocally that Mrs. Linda Harrison's character has been completely vindicated, the judge declared. The evidence shows a woman of impeccable integrity and profound dedication to her family who was systematically victimized by those who exploited her love and trust. The narrative of her mental instability and emotional abuse was a calculated fabrication designed to facilitate theft and manipulation. Mrs. Harrison's lifelong commitment to nurturing young artists and protecting her family is what ultimately brought this conspiracy to light. The formal restoration of my dignity felt almost as important as the financial restitution. For over 2 years, I had been painted as a delusional old woman whose love had become dangerous to her own family. Now the world knew the truth. I had been right all along to fight for my daughter's understanding and my own integrity. In the weeks that followed the trial, the letters began arriving. The first came from Daniel, written from his prison cell in handwriting that shook with desperation and what appeared to be genuine remorse. Linda, he wrote, I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I need you to understand how completely I lost my way. I started out thinking I was protecting Emily from what I saw as your controlling behavior, but somewhere along the way, I became the very thing I claimed to be fighting against. The greed, the manipulation, the cruelty, none of it was who I thought I was. He went on to describe the slow progression of justifications that had eventually consumed his moral compass. Every lie required another lie to support it. Every manipulation demanded more sophisticated deception. Before I knew it, I had created this whole conspiracy to steal from you, and I couldn't back down without admitting that everything I had done was wrong. Reading Daniel's letter filled me with a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction in his admission of guilt, but also a profound sadness for the man who had destroyed not only my life, but his own family's future through choices that had seemed so reasonable to him at the time. The letter that truly broke my heart came from Emily 3 weeks after the trial. Written in her familiar handwriting, it was raw, honest, and devastating to read. "Mom," she wrote, "I don't know where to begin with an apology for what I've done to you, to us, to our entire family. I've been in therapy every day since the trial, trying to understand how I became someone who could stand by while the man I married systematically destroyed the woman who gave me life." She went on to describe her gradual recognition of how Daniel had manipulated her perceptions of our relationship, how he had used her childhood insecurities about my expectations to justify increasingly cruel treatment of me. "I was so afraid of being controlled that I let myself be controlled by someone whose motives were far more sinister than anything you ever did." The most heartbreaking part of Emily's letter was her recognition of the sacrifice I had made by hiding her genetic condition. "I understand now why you pushed me so hard, why you seemed so demanding about my training and discipline. You were trying to prepare me for a battle I didn't even know was coming. All those years, I thought you were being cruel. You were actually trying to save me." Emily's commitment to making amends was genuine and profound. She had left Daniel even before his trial, taking the children and moving back to our hometown. She began visiting me regularly, asking questions about our family history, trying to understand the woman she had allowed others to portray as a monster. "I want to rebuild our relationship from the ground up," she told me during one of our first honest conversations in years. "I want to be the daughter you deserve to have during the worst time of your life. I know I can't change what I did, but I want to spend whatever time we have left showing you that I remember who you really are." The grandchildren's healing process was slower and more complex. Emma and Jake had been manipulated and used as weapons against me, and they carried deep trauma from watching their family implode so publicly. But with therapy and Emily's support, they began reaching out, tentatively asking questions about dance and about the grandmother they had been taught to fear, Grandma Linda. Emma said during one of our first real conversations after the trial, "I don't understand how Dad convinced me to say those things about you. I know you're not crazy, and I've always known that. But somehow, he made me feel like I had to choose between loving you and protecting our family." Jake's journey was even more painful as he struggled with guilt over the cruel things he had said about me during the campaign. "I didn't mean it when I said you should die." He cried during one of our sessions together. "Dad told me you were hurting Mom, and I thought I was protecting her. I'm so sorry, Grandma." The healing process would take years, but seeing the genuine remorse and love in their eyes gave me hope that the bonds Daniel had tried to sever could eventually be stronger than before. Brenda faced her prison sentence in the complete isolation that her choices had created. Abandoned by what remained of her social circle and facing financial ruin from the legal judgments against her, she entered prison as alone as she had tried to make me. The victory was complete, but bittersweet. My stolen savings had been restored with substantial additional damages for the emotional suffering I had endured. My reputation had been cleared, my dignity restored, my relationships with Emily and my grandchildren rebuilt on a foundation of truth rather than manipulation. But the cost had been enormous. Daniel was in prison, Emily and the children were traumatized, and years of my life had been consumed by a battle that had torn our family apart. The truth had prevailed, but at a price that would take a lifetime to fully understand. Still, as I sat in my restored home, surrounded by the legal documents that proved my vindication and the letters from family members asking for forgiveness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over 2 years: hope. The nightmare was finally over, and the people who truly loved me were finding their way back to the light. 3 years after the trial that changed everything, I wake each morning in my carefully restored home with a sense of profound gratitude that still surprises me. The house that had almost been lost to Daniel's fraud has been transformed back into the sanctuary it was always meant to be. Every room has been thoughtfully returned to its original warmth and beauty, filled once again with my dance memorabilia, family photographs, and the countless small treasures that tell the story of a life dedicated to nurturing artistic expression and family love. The restoration process had been both practical and deeply therapeutic. Each piece of ballet equipment returned to its proper place, each photograph re-hung with care, each memento restored to its rightful prominence, represented not just the recovery of my material possessions, but the reconstruction of my identity as both a teacher and a mother. My health has improved dramatically since the stress and fear that had nearly killed me were finally removed from my life. The heart problems that had hospitalized me during the worst of the fraud have stabilized, and my doctor says I have the vitality of someone 10 years younger. Freedom from manipulation and psychological abuse, it turns out, is indeed a powerful medicine. I've reestablished my presence in the local arts community, but in ways that bring me more joy than my previous professional commitments ever did. 3 times a week, I teach gentle ballet classes for seniors at the community center, sharing the beauty of movement with people who understand that grace and strength can coexist with age and experience. My students are women and men who find in dance not a demand for perfection, but a celebration of what their bodies can still accomplish. These classes have become the heartbeat of my new life. There's something deeply healing about watching a 70-year-old woman discover that she can still execute a beautiful port de bras, or seeing a retired gentleman find confidence and poise through careful attention to posture and movement. We're not preparing for professional careers or competitive performances. We're simply celebrating the joy that comes from moving with intention and grace. My relationship with Daniel continues to evolve through his letters from prison. His journey toward redemption is genuine and profound, marked by brutal honesty about his failures and a deep commitment to psychological healing that gives me cautious hope for his future. Linda, he wrote in his most recent letter, I'm learning that the greed I felt wasn't really about money at all. It was about my deep insecurity, about not being good enough for Emily, not being successful enough to deserve the life we had built together. I thought if I could just eliminate what I saw as competition for her attention and loyalty, I could feel secure in our relationship. He's begun participating in programs for inmates who have damaged their family relationships through financial crimes, working with other men who are trying to understand how they became capable of betraying the people they loved most. I hope someday I can earn the right to ask for your forgiveness, he continued. But even if that day never comes, I want you to know that I'm becoming the man Emily and the children deserve to have as a husband and father. While our relationship may never fully recover, I've found peace in knowing that he's genuinely working to understand and address the character flaws that made him vulnerable to Brenda's influence and his own worst impulses. The most beautiful aspect of my new life has been the complete healing of my relationship with Emily. My daughter has become my closest companion, my strongest advocate, and my most treasured source of joy. We spend hours together, exploring art galleries, attending ballet performances, and simply enjoying each other's company in ways that were impossible when our relationship was shadowed by misunderstanding and manipulation. I think what happened to our family taught me the difference between supporting someone and enabling someone, Emily reflected during one of our recent conversations. I spent so many years trying to keep Daniel happy that I forgot about protecting the people who really mattered. You never forgot that, even when it cost you everything. Emily has become my partner in the advocacy work that has given my later years such profound meaning and purpose. Together, we speak at conferences about elder abuse prevention work with legal organizations to help other families facing financial exploitation and support survivors who are fighting their own battles against family manipulation. Emma and Jake have healed beautifully from the trauma they experienced, and our relationship has been rebuilt on a foundation of complete honesty about what happened during those dark years. Emma, now 19 and in college, has developed a real love for dance that she explores as artistic expression rather than professional ambition. Grandma Linda, she told me recently, "I want to understand how you always knew the difference between pushing someone to be their best and pushing them beyond their limits. I want to learn how to be demanding in a way that builds people up instead of tearing them down." Jake, now 17, has become fascinated with the technical aspects of dance, helping me with the video documentation I'm creating to preserve traditional ballet techniques for future generations. "You showed me that discipline and kindness aren't opposites," he said. "They're actually the same thing when you really love someone." Brenda remains in prison, serving her sentence in the isolation that her choices created. I feel no satisfaction in her suffering, only a kind of philosophical sadness about the way greed and manipulation ultimately destroy those who embrace them. The most meaningful development in my new life has been my work as a national advocate for elder abuse prevention and family healing, using my story as a powerful example of both the devastation that financial exploitation can cause and the possibility of justice and recovery. I've spoken at conferences across the country, testified before congressional committees about the need for stronger elder protection laws, and worked with legal organizations to help other families facing similar challenges. My memoir, Grace Under Pressure, A Dance Teacher's Fight for Truth and Family, became a bestseller and has generated thousands of letters from readers who recognize their own struggles in my story. Many have found the courage to seek help for their own situations, armed with the knowledge that sophisticated family manipulation can be overcome and that authentic relationships can be rebuilt on foundations of honesty and mutual respect. The senior support group I help facilitate has become my chosen family, a circle of wise, resilient people who understand that the final chapters of our lives can be the most meaningful if we have the courage to fight for truth and dignity. My life is often filled with laughter now. Emily's voice in the studio as she helps me teach my senior classes, Emma and Jake's animated discussions about their plans to make the world more understanding and compassionate, the gentle conversations of support group members as we share our journeys from victim to survivor to advocate. As I sit in my garden each evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, I often reflect on the journey that brought me to this place of peace and purpose. The pain of those dark years hasn't disappeared entirely. The scars of betrayal run deep, and I still sometimes wake in the night, remembering the terror of being homeless and abandoned by those I loved most. But I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the pain never existed. It means integrating the lessons of that pain into a life of greater wisdom, deeper compassion, and more authentic relationships. The woman who emerged from that crucible is stronger, more purposeful, and more at peace than the woman who entered it, though the cost of that transformation was almost unbearable. My life now is defined not by what was taken from me, but by what I chose to build from the wreckage. I have my dignity, my artistic legacy, my beautiful home, and most importantly, relationships based on truth rather than manipulation or fear. The victory was worth fighting for, even though the price was higher than I ever imagined it could be. Truth did prevail, justice was served, and a life of authentic purpose and meaningful connection proved to be possible no matter how dark the circumstances seemed. Years have passed since that devastating conversation when Emily first accused me of lacking humanity in my parenting. And as I look back on the journey from that moment of initial shock to this place of profound peace, I'm struck by how completely my understanding of love, strength, and happiness has been transformed. My life today radiates an inner peace that was hard-won through the crucible of the most devastating betrayal imaginable. This house, once threatened by greed and manipulation, has become a sanctuary filled with authentic joy and meaningful purpose. The laughter of Emily and my grandchildren echoes through rooms that once felt like they might be lost forever. Friends from my advocacy work, colleagues from the dance community, and fellow survivors who've become like family regularly gather around my dining room table, creating the kind of chosen community that's built on shared values rather than accidents of birth. I've become a nationally recognized voice in the fight against elder abuse and family exploitation, my story serving as both a warning about the insidious nature of financial manipulation disguised as family concern and a beacon of hope for those who find themselves trapped in similar nightmares. The memoir I wrote has touched thousands of lives, and the letters I receive from readers often tell me that my experience gave them the courage to seek help when their own families tried to exploit their love and trust. The greatest lesson I've learned through this ordeal is that my strength never lay in silent endurance or keeping peace at any cost, but in my willingness to courageously confront deception and fight for my fundamental rights and dignity. I discovered that self-worth is truly unshakable when it's built on truth and integrity rather than other people's approval, and that authentic family connections are those based on transparency and genuine care, not manipulation or hidden agendas. I carry no bitterness toward those who betrayed me so completely. Daniel's weakness and Brenda's cruelty were tragic flaws that destroyed their own lives far more completely than they ever harmed mine. Even Emily's initial rejection ultimately served to clarify what really matters in relationships and what doesn't. Their choices revealed their character, while my response to their betrayal revealed mine. To anyone listening to my story who recognizes echoes of their own struggles with family manipulation, financial exploitation, or the profound loneliness that can come with standing up for what's right, I want you to know this truth really does prevail, even when the battle seems hopeless. Human dignity can be reclaimed even after the most devastating attacks. A life of purpose and authentic connection is always possible, no matter how complete the destruction may seem. The spirit of resilience that carried me through the darkest valley of my life continues to sustain me in these golden years of advocacy and authentic relationships. My commitment to nurturing artistic expression and family love, tested by the cruelest manipulations imaginable, emerged not just intact, but stronger and more precise than ever before. The principles I spent 40 years living by proved their worth when everything else was stripped away. Most importantly, I learned that happiness isn't about having the family you were born into treat you well, but about creating the life you can live with integrity and peace. The woman who sits in this garden today, surrounded by people who love her for who she really is, rather than what she might provide them, is more content and fulfilled than the woman who began this journey, believing that love alone was enough to overcome any obstacle. Sometimes the most profound courage is found not in grand gestures, but in the quiet determination to keep fighting for truth when everyone around you has chosen the easier path of lies and compromise. Sometimes the greatest victory is not in defeating your enemies, but in refusing to become like them, no matter how much they take from you. I am 67 now, and I have never been more certain that love, honesty, and respect for human dignity will always triumph over greed and manipulation, no matter how sophisticated the deception or how powerful those who perpetrate it may seem. The truth is worth fighting for, dignity is worth defending, and hope is always justified, even in the darkest hours of family betrayal.